Welcome to the Am I Hunting Podcast. In this episode, we're talking deer tracking with Calvin Dennis from Scent Hunter Track. All right, welcome to the Am I Hunting Podcast. As always, thank you for listening. So this episode was another good one. I had Calvin from Scent Hunter Tracking come back on. If you remember, he was on for episode 51. So if you haven't listened to that one, that's a good one to listen to again, because he kind of goes through kind of what his process is, and this kind of talks dog tracking or tracking deer with dogs in general. And then so this episode focused on a lot of the data that he collected throughout the course of the season and he basically did a breakdown of the success rate of recoveries based on the means of take, the type of equipment being used, and he also tracked another big one was the duration of all the tracks he did, and he compiled all this data. And some of the data that he presented is pretty interesting in regards to some of the things that you wouldn't really necessarily think that would be the case. So especially when in regards to the broadhead type, there's a big debate on what type of broadhead is used and which one's better. And this one kind of paints some interesting figures that, at least from one season, can get kind of thrown in the mix there. And the next big one was really the length of tracks that he did. It was amazing the average length of a track that he would go on, certainly much further than what anyone would really anticipate. So really it kind of hammers in the idea of, potentially, if you're going to be, doing a solo track by yourself, some of these distances are quite daunting, and it's very easy for us as, hunters to get, frustrated, confused, start missing sign. So that's why it's, one of those things that a dog, bringing a dog in could really help you in regards to getting that track, or potentially having a better chance of not missing something and losing your deer. Now, I do have to preface too, during this recording, I didn't realize it until after we were done that I did have some audio issues, so I did have to do some corrections, a lot of manipulating of the audio to try to get the sound right. So if there are times where the sound or the audio is distorted, or some of the things don't quite sound all that good, that was again my fault on not realizing that one of the microphones was going out, and so I had to do a lot of manipulating in that regard. Also on this one, we're not going to have the video. I basically had a video camera going, recording us sitting and talking and going over this data. That data as well got corrupted, and I wasn't able to use it, or couldn't get it to transfer over properly. So it's going to be, for the ones that go on YouTube, it's basically, I'm just going to kind of leave the title screen. I am going to throw on, though, the papers from Calvin's, data. So while you're listening, if you do go on to YouTube, you can actually, look at the actual data that he has typed out or calculated out as well. But outside of that, it's going to be a pretty boring watch if you decide you want to watch the video. And then also wanted to highlight that, again, this is the last week of August. Hunting season is really starting to get, right around the corner here. And then also we've got several of the early seasons opening up. So what we got coming up is the Liberty Hunt. That is going to be September 9th and 10th. Again, that's for youth hunters and hunters with disabilities. Then we also have the early antlerless season. That one's September 16th and the 17th. Now again, that one, the tricky thing is with that one, it is for private land only. So if you don't have some private ground to hunt, then fortunately you don't get to participate in that unless you got someone that does, that allows you to hunt on their property. And then of course we got small game season opening up September 15th, and that's going to open up for rabbit season, squirrel, woodcock, and rough grouse. So if you're a small game hunter, you're looking forward to that here in the next few weeks as well. And then it's really just getting, crunch time for deer season. So you can already start to feel it in the weather. We're getting some of those more crisp mornings. I'm already starting to see some of the trees starting to turn as I'm driving around. So it's starting to get that time where, a lot of people are still trying to hang on to summer, and especially us as hunters, we're starting to look forward to fall. So, but I'm not going to hang on this for too long, so we're going to get right into the conversation with Calvin. Well, let's start with an update. So you went through the certification with Willow.
Yep.
And you've got another dog that's in training.
Yep.
Scout. And then now you're in collaboration with another tracker as well.
That's correct.
So I guess let's just talk about the collaboration, who you partnered up with, and why you guys grouped up together, and what service that's going to provide.
Yeah, a lot of big changes this year, all for the better, obviously. But so this year, I took and brought on Brian Kendall, a guy out of Calava, who's a deer tracker. He's been doing it 3 years. This season will be his 4th year. He's got a porcelain hound, which is similar to a bloodhound, all white dog. He's got a really good dog. He's got about 50 tracks under his belt.
Okay.
And really, the collaboration between that is last year I became friends with Brian. Kind of one of those deals that the tracking list came out, and I seen it on there, and it said Manistee County. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. I've tracked Manistee County, but I've never seen him before or heard of him. So I gave him a call and said, hey, told him who I was, told him what I did, and we got to become really good friends. And throughout the season last year, as some people that have followed my Facebook page probably have seen, Brian and I did some tag team tracks last year. He came out on a track with me on a couple occasions, and then I went out on a couple of tracks with him, as well as we had a track that Willow had done 4 in the previous day, and the specific buck we tracked was a liver shot deer. It was like 16 hours old, and we had gone in there thinking 16 hours was plenty of time for that deer to die, and it was still alive. And I kind of decided that night, after we found the deer still alive, jumped him, I said, you know what, Willow's run pretty much out of all energy for the day and for probably even the next day. So I called Brian up, and that was kind of a tag team track. So with that said, kind of talked with Brian a little bit and said, hey, this is kind of what I'm thinking. Would you be interested in joining the Scent Hunter team? Brian doesn't work for me. He's not in any way, shape, or form paying me, and I'm not getting anything out of it other than exposure for both of us. And I thought it would just be kind of nice for, Northern Michigan doesn't have a lot of trackers in general, and so I wanted to be able to promote that there is a couple guys up here that are doing that, put them on our team, be able to have people, and really, I think in general, a lot of people enjoy looking at the Facebook page and seeing the success. Obviously, there's a lot of downs with that, but the success of finding people's deer, and I wanted to bring Brian in on that. Brian's not much of a Facebook guy, so he said, you do a really good job at writing all your stories, and I like seeing all that stuff. He said, I want to join in on some of that, and I said, all right, cool, so let's do it.
Nice. And then, so you guys are going to handle, what's kind of what range of counties or areas are you guys going to cover?
So we're going to be, he's Manistee County, I'm Benzie County, but as a whole, we're going to travel, time willing, to different counties. Grand Traverse, Leelanau, Benzie, Manistee. We've been down to Mason County, Lake County. So it's all dependent on the day and how the tracks are going. We might be close to one in, Ludington when we're in Manistee already. But obviously, if we get a track in Leelanau County and we're in Mason County, it's a little hard to, make that span. So it'll be kind of time dependent on where we're at for the time of the day and where that next track is. But that's the benefit to having both Brian and I now is, if Brian's already in Manistee County and there's a track in Manistee County and he can take it, I'll let him take that one, because maybe there'll be another one in Benzie or Leelanau that I can grab, and we'll kind of work both aspects of it. So,
gotcha. And then you and Brian are now certified?
Yep. So we did some more off-season training after last season. Got Willow ready and took her through the UBT1 track this year, and it was a flawless run for her. Kind of a unique story and kind of cool on my part. When I signed up to take the test again to have Willow certified, the judge that we ended up with, a guy named Eric Peterson, who tracks downstate, he got a hold of me and said, hey, let's schedule this day. And when we got there that day, he said, just so you know, he said, we had judges fighting over you. And I said, what do you mean fighting over me? He said, well, every day we don't get Parsons Russell Terriers. And he said a lot of the judges like to get different breeds. And he said we had a lot of guys trying to fight over who was going to do your judging. He said, but obviously you see who won.
Right.
So we were able to go down and do that test. And I say a flawless run. I didn't have any callbacks, no recalls. Willow pretty much jumped on the line and went right to it. And that UBT run is 400 to 500 yards long, 290-degree turns, and it was a pretty good run. I was pretty impressed with her.
How old is that? How old is the trail then?
It's 3 to 4 hours long.
3 to 4?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So, and on that same day, Brian and I actually followed each other down. My wife went with me. His wife went with him. We both drove separate vehicles, but he actually ran his UBT2 that day, and he passed and succeeded in that too. So.
And that's basically just a higher classification for
Yep,
longer
it's
tracks,
just the
older
next step
trails.
up. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, so I guess what are the, by going through that process, what benefit does that have for you?
Really now, there's some state changes in the laws this year and the rules, guidelines of tracking. But prior to, the UBT was kind of a requirement to become a state certified tracker. This year, that's changed a little bit. So really, it's more the UBT testing is more just for the dog and the handler. And I say dog and handler, it's more for the handler because the dog doesn't know any different that they have a certificate or not, but more to just prove that your training is doing what you're supposed to be doing and proving that you're putting the time and the effort in. And that's really what it comes down to. When I first got into it 3 years ago, I really didn't know much about it. And so doing your research, putting the work in, and really coming down to the fact that you're doing the time and the labor to get your dog where it needs to be successfully. Unfortunately, there is guys out there that just have a dog and they say I have a deer tracking dog, but they don't put the work in. If I could add up all the hours that I've put into training, I'd have another full-time job. But it takes a lot of work to get your dog prepped and primed to where you want it to be. And I'm really excited about this season to see what Willow's going to do because she's coming into her third season. A lot of the veteran guys that have been tracking say usually the 3-4 year mark is where they really start to show you that they're in their prime. And I think Willow's really going to surprise me this year.
Yeah.
She really started to surprise me at the end of last year.
Yeah, I mean, even the track that we did, that was earlier in the season.
Yep.
I mean, that track was what? It was at least a 12-hour track.
Yeah, I would say somewhere in that 12 to 14 hour range.
And I mean, she stuck her nose in that first track, and I think she paused once at the edge of the field.
Yep.
And then not again the whole rest of the track.
Yeah, and it was kind of cool for us. Did the podcast last year and talked about it. And then you were actually at my house picking up some swag that day and said, hey, I'm going to hunt on the farm tonight. Are you going to be available? And I said, yeah. And then 3 hours later, you called me. And so it was kind of cool to see it come full circle.
Yeah.
And the other cool part about that is not obviously that it was cool that you called me because obviously you were in that position. But, I've had a few people that watched the podcast and then they seen your picture on Facebook and said, man, what a cool full story to watch it come all the way around, to have you talk about it and know what to do next. And you did everything, like we'd hoped.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I know that. I mean, again, even this a little bit of seeing the more posts and more stories about people using dog tracking,
Sure.
and then you being part of that, it was something I was certainly interested in, and especially too after seeing all your posts and seeing Willow work. Like, I've even gone so far, I've changed a little bit of my arrow setup.
Sure.
So I could, basically I added wraps to my arrows.
Yep.
So I could be like, okay, I can get a better idea of what type of blood it is. And, adding white fletching to it is, things I didn't think about before that I might need to know after the shot's made. Usually you don't think about that when you put your arrow together. You're like, all right, it's, the arrow flight and stuff like that.
What
but
bright colors can I find in the woods after I shoot the arrow? That's usually what people think of. When I was there, I used to shoot bright green or bright orange or, something that I could find the arrow after I made the shot.
Yep.
But now thinking forward, what can I do to see the blood on the arrow? What can I do to make it easier, not only for yourself, but if you happen to have somebody come in?
Yep, exactly. And again, before last season, never thought about that type of stuff. Never even occurred to me.
Yeah.
But and you did say that there are state changes to the state or
There
the
is.
regulation.
Yep.
So let's go over some of those
Yep.
fine points.
So they did change this year the rules, the regulations for deer tracking. Um, Most for the better, and I wouldn't say there's anything real major, but so they're going to allow off-lead tracking this year. So before in the state of Michigan, you had to use a leash to track with your dog. They had to be on leash all the time. This year, they're going to allow off-lead tracking. I'm not going to sit here and go word for word. I think we talked. You might put this up so people can read it, but
Yep.
You have to have control of the dog and demonstrate knowledge of the dog's location and a method to do that. So what a lot of guys are using is GPS collars.
Right.
You can show them on your phone. So you're out doing a deer track somewhere, DNR stops you and says, hey, where's your dog? You need to be able to pull up on your phone and show them, or on your GPS locator and say, hey, my dog's right here. And then if they ask you to, you need to bring your dog back. Your dog needs to come back right away. They need to see that your dog can come back to you right away and that you have full control over your dog.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's one of the big changes. For me, I'm not going to track off lead. That's just not something I've done. I've not done any training with it. And I'll just leave it at that. That's just kind of where I stand. I still like to see my dog work, and I want to be able to be in full control of my dog. So some of the other changes they came up with is beforehand, if you were not a state certified deer tracker, you didn't have to register with the DNR. So like the past 2 years for me, I was able to just go out and track, and it wasn't a big deal. Now, anybody who wants to track deer has to be registered through the state. So what that's going to do is it's just going to allow the DNR to know who's in the woods with a dog and when they're tracking. When I say that as when they're tracking, every single track that we go on this year has to go through the Report All Poaching hotline. So we're going to have to call in all of our tracks, tell them the hunter's name, give them their info, the location of where we're at the time, and obviously we'll give them my name, and they're just going to make sure that we're listed under that registered portion. And then that'll just give the DNR that ability to say, hey, if something were to happen, was this tracker out here and did you dispatch at 12:30 at night or whatever it may be. And I say dispatch at night, so now being a registered tracker in the state of Michigan, you have the ability that if the deer is still alive at 12:30 at night, you can use whatever the weapon of choice is to put that deer down to end the suffering.
Yeah. And then I don't remember before you got registered, before you got certified, could you track at night, or did it have to be during daylight?
Nope, we could track.
You could track
day or night.
but then you couldn't. The hunter couldn't take their bow or firearm with them.
So the big difference for the last 2 years for me is I didn't have the ability to have that hunter carry their weapon.
Yep.
And that'll be a big change for this year. Is anybody who's tracking is able to have that hunter weapon of the season carry with them. There's pluses and minuses. Obviously, the pluses are we can put down that deer and end the suffering. We can also, because there's times where you come up on a deer and it's alive still, how far are we going to push it again? Maybe it got pushed the night before, now we come up to it. Are we going to push it again even further? The hope is obviously we can end that suffering right then and there. There's a lot of safety with that, though. I mean, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to come about. So my take on it is, compound bow is no big deal because obviously you have to load one. So arrows need to stay in the quiver. Crossbows will not be loaded until the point of kill, and that's part of the law.
Yep. Yeah, they made a point of that you're not going to have, you're not going to be locked and loaded.
Correct.
During the track.
Yep. And with that, even gun season, and I've taken this from a lot of the veteran guys who've been doing this for a while. They'll actually take, if it's during rifle season, they'll actually take the bullets from the hunter and put them in their pocket. And it isn't until the point of kill that they hand them the bullet and say, okay, here you go. And it's just a safety factor. There is an instance last year that happened to a tracker in a state that it was legal, but the hunter was carrying a crossbow and it was loaded, and just an unfortunate mishap, the tracker was actually shot in the back of the leg with a crossbow.
Oh.
And so that's just the safety features that you have to be mindful of. And there's a podcast out there with that tracker that talks about his unfortunate mishap.
Yeah.
But he explains, what happened, and he doesn't put any blame on the hunter. I mean, it's just part of the deal. So,
Yep.
but for me, being safe, that's just not going to happen. Plus, it's a rule that you can't carry, a loaded weapon. So,
Yep. And then let's see, is there anything else?
I don't think. So. I mean, you can do, and it registers right in there. It says wounded deer, elk, bear. So those are all animals that can be tracked.
Yep. And then it's only the licensed hunter that can dispatch the animal, so the tracker can't do it themselves. Or
Yep. We don't have tracker dispatch in this state.
Yep. So I think that's about it for the
Yeah.
the law.
Right.
You did mention though, you talked about having to report that if you guys are out there at night and dispatch an animal.
Right.
We did talk about that a little bit before we started recording. That that could be pretty important when it comes to like you said, November 18th, and all of a sudden someone hears a shot at
And that's why they make you do that. They want to just know that if at 2 a.m, you and I are out tracking your deer on November 18th, and let's say you gut shot it, and we happen to come up on it, it's bedded down, and you take that shot and you shoot it and kill it. The neighbor doesn't hear that gunshot and call either DNR or call 911 and say, hey, I just heard a gunshot. They can go on their report our poaching list, and they can just look and say, oh yeah, we've got Tracker Kelvin out with such and such, and we know that that's why they did what they did, and they put that deer down, and it's an end story instead of chasing down leads and trying to figure out what happened.
Yep. Yep. And again, once you're done with your track, you report, hey, we're done.
Yep. You just call the number back. You just say, hey, we're done. We finished this track. And a lot of the times, again, I didn't have to do this last year, but the couple tracks I went with Brian, they'll usually ask. The dispatcher's usually interested, and they'll say, did you find it? Or, oh, okay, cool. That was really good. So, yeah, it's just a matter of closing that track out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, you were quite worried earlier this year that they were going to come out with a bunch of rules that are going to make it much more difficult and almost kind of problematic for anyone that wants to try to be a good tracker and help people find deer, where it's going to be almost discouraging from people that actually want to do that.
Right. Yeah, they had some different regulations on the table that were going to be for the benefit of a lot of the people that were already tracking, but harder for people that wanted to get into it. And I think this kind of opens the doors for both aspects of it. It still allows you to be a tracker. It still allows you to be a new tracker. It just makes sure that you're being safe and you're registered through the state. So the other thing that this does, and it happens, I mean, everybody has a scenario that's a tracker that can tell you, you shoot a deer and you make 4 phone calls to 4 different deer trackers within your area, and it's November 2nd. And so those 4 trackers are busy. And what this is going to do is it's going to stop your buddy from bringing his couch dog out to try to put on a deer, hopefully. Because, again, what that's doing is it's going to stop the guys that just think that, oh, I have a couch dog and I'm going to bring it out and I'm going to charge you $200. They at least have to be certified through the state, so the state knows who you are. They're not verifying that you actually have a tracking dog, but that's what some of the groups out there too that promote tracking dogs do as well. They kind of promote that these people are certified, they know what they're doing, they've been around the block a time or two, that at least they can prove that they've had a tracking dog that finds deer.
Yep. And then again, I don't know exactly where the step is, but is there an app that's coming out that has a list of trackers and like their contact information that if you want to, you could reach out to?
Yeah. So that's another part of the big news for us this year is so we talked a little bit last year about the different groups that are out there and how trackers can be found. The United Blood Trackers is one of them. That's one we've been part of. The Michigan Deer Trackers, that's another one we've been part of. You've probably seen the map. It's listed all the names. The Michigan Deer Tracking Network is another one that's out there, and that's more of the bigger one of the 3 for Michigan. And they do a very limited amount of people that they allow onto their group and their network. And so this year they had an application process. They had everybody put an application that was interested in being a part of their group. And There was 3 of us selected. I don't know how many people applied, but there was only 3 selected to be put onto their group this year. We were one of them, so we were kind of excited about that. And so through the Michigan Deer Tracking Network, they're coming out with their own app. And honestly, I'm not 100% certain on how it's going to work because it's new. And we actually have a group picnic tomorrow down in Lansing that we're going to be at, that they're going to unveil the app and to kind of tell us all about it. So
Okay.
it'll be kind of a learning process for me. But from what I know of it, it's going to be an app that's available with all the Michigan Deer Tracking Network guys in it. And you're going to go on there. You're going to be able to find the location that you're at. Click the area. It's going to bring up all the trackers that are in their area. And then you're going to put your information in there. And what that'll do is it'll come across on our end for us to see that, hey, there's somebody that wants to track in this location. And from there, we're going to be able to select it and say, okay, I want that track, and select it. So everybody's going to get kind of a turn on whether they get to take the track or not. And then people can accept it through that app. Again, that's just kind of how I see it.
Yeah. And again, I think that's going to be more beneficial, not necessarily for you guys, the trackers,
Right.
per se, but for someone that, like you said, if it gets busy during the rut time frame, early November, opening day, first, weekend
Sure.
of firearm season, I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that kill a lot of deer in the same area, and their tracker's going to be tied up. So there is a tracker that's free. If they're willing to travel a little bit further,
Sure.
they can help that person out.
And the other side of that is not that there's not going to be phone calls, because obviously our numbers are listed, but it'll take some of the phone calls away, and it'll be in the app form versus, having that hunter have to pick up the phone and dial 14 different phone numbers. They can go in the app and send it once and hope that of those 14 calls they were going to make, one of those 14 trackers will take theirs without even having to call. So it'll probably speed up the process a little bit, and it'll make it more efficient. But yeah, excited to see how everything rolls out with it this year.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Again, good luck with the picnic then. Hopefully it...
Yeah, it should be interesting. We're going to take the drive down tomorrow. It's a little bit of a drive, but it'll be fun. We're going to, a lot of those guys I've either met once or twice, or I see them on Facebook, but I don't really know who they are. So
Right.
it'd be nice to put a name and a face together and talk to them.
Yeah.
Yep, it should be a good time.
Good.
Bunch of guys standing around talking about their dogs.
Right. How many do you think will be bringing their dogs, or are they?
I don't know if anybody. There'll probably be a few guys with their dogs.
Yeah.
There's 50 of us on that list, so there'll be at least 50 guys. It should be good.
All right. Well, hey, I mean, again, we've got, 2 weeks before people first start hunting this year.
Yeah.
And then, October 1st isn't that far away, so.
Coming up quick.
Yep.
Yeah. And
then so let's get into really the big reason why I wanted to especially have you come back in, because out of the last seasons that you've been doing, you've gone above and beyond and collected a ton of data on the tracks you did, and you basically compiled a list of the tracks you did and the success rates and the means of take, essentially.
Sure.
So you broke that all down. So let's get into that, because that's got a lot of really good data and information that people can take into consideration.
Yeah, so this kind of came from I watched a video one day, a guy named Shane Simpson who tracks out of Minnesota, and he does something similar to this, just collecting some data throughout the season, and they have compiled, I would say, probably 5 or 6 years worth of data. Obviously, this is a small portion of that. This is only a year for me. And so I thought it was kind of unique. I'm not so sure after the first season of doing it that it was worth it. And I only say that because it takes a lot of time and effort. And it's every track that you go on, you have to remember all the details. And so I try to do all that during the beginning of the track. And, when I first take that phone call, I'm writing a lot of this information down so I have it. But it takes the information of, what kind of bow were you shooting, what kind of broadhead were you shooting. I don't specifically break it down to brand, but at least a mechanical versus a fixed blade. And I try to get all that information and put it together and compile a list. Now, what does it mean? This year it doesn't mean anything, but 5 years from now, it'll probably mean something that I can bring back to you and say, hey, between 5 years of data collection, your best opportunity to kill a deer is to shoot a compound bow with this broadhead or a crossbow with this broadhead. Is it for sure? No. But it gives you some good data to look at. So the way I have it broke down here is we did 55 tracks last year. Of the 55 tracks, 50 of them were archery. The other 5 were firearm or a muzzleloader.
Yep.
So we'll just get started. The compound bows, I did 24 tracks last year that were compound bows. That's 48% of my tracks. And then we break down between those the fixed blade and the mechanical broadhead. So the fixed blade broadhead, I did 10 total tracks that were shot out of a compound bow. We recovered 5 of those, and then obviously we didn't recover the other 5. So 50% recovery rate. Mechanical broadheads, we did 14 tracks out of a compound bow. We recovered 12 of those, but we didn't recover 2. So, you can go back and look, and I have all this data. I can probably go back even further and say, okay, where was that deer shot with this broadhead? Now, the thing that we don't know is the ones that I didn't recover. Do we really truly know where that deer was shot?
Right.
As we get further into some data, it's more or less a guess on my end because I'm only going off of what the hunter tells me. So you tell me on my grid chart that you shot it at C9. I'm only going off of that. But if we don't find the deer, I really don't know where you hit it.
Right.
We could put together a little information and say, okay, well, I believe you hit the deer here, and here's why: because of the blood color, the sign that we seen, the bed that we found where the blood was at, maybe the color hair that we have, so all that stuff kind of goes into that. But again, it's still a guess on my part. So again, compound bow, we did a total of 17 recoveries out of 24 tracks, 71%. So that's not bad.
Yep. And then you had broken it down too for the fixed blade. You had a 50% recovery rate out of those tracks you did, and then for the mechanicals was jumped up to 85.
Yeah.
Now, probably because of those mechanicals having those larger cutting diameters, you could speculate all you want.
We can speculate.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's why I say 5 years from now, it'd probably be a little bit better information to put all these years together and say, okay, this is really truly what we have. Now, it very well could turn the table and look totally different next year. We don't know.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, if you're out there, if you're big in the archery, there's a big debate between the mechanical fixed blade.
It's huge.
Crowd.
Yep.
And like you said, this preliminary, but I mean, it shows that the mechanicals are potentially performing better than those fixed blades are.
And the other side of that too, that I'm not really sure on, is it would be interesting too. And again, it would take more work on my end, but to ask these people that shoot, and I didn't break it down for yardage, but if it was a fixed blade broadhead over 40 yards, to ask that hunter, do you practice at 40 yards with your fixed blade? Because that makes a big difference too. I mean, if you're shooting a fixed blade broadhead and you've never shot it over 40 yards, but you took a shot at 47 yards with it, well, that would make sense why you didn't kill the deer, because you've never shot it past that to know whether it flies true or not.
Right.
So again, is it 85% recovery rate because they were within 25 yards and they practiced all the time? Because typically a mechanical blade will fly true to a field point. Fixed blade broadheads tend at times to not fly true like a field point. So again, speculate all you want. This is the data that I have. Mean anything? Probably not yet.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, truly enjoy seeing some of this stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, like you said, just looking at these two figures, like there's too many variables. You can't make a determination of exactly what's going on yet.
Sure.
You would need to know, like you said, shot placement, distance of the shot.
Yep.
And
I have a lot of that information. I really do. It'd just be a matter of breaking it down even further.
Right.
This is long enough to sit down and break it down. But it's fun to me and it's unique, and especially after the season's done, I've got time to sit down and really go through this. And it's interesting to me as we get further here too. I broke it even down into the distance in yards on how many yards we tracked, and that's interesting data to me. That's probably more interesting than these broadhead.
Yeah.
But
it's more fun to talk about. This is more of a hot topic.
It is. Yeah. So crossbows. So we did 26 tracks last year. So 2 more tracks than we did with the compound. 52% of them. Fixed blade broadheads, we did 11 total tracks. Of the 11 tracks that we did with a fixed blade broadhead out of a crossbow, we only recovered 2 deer. 9 of those were not recovered, so 18% recovery rate. Now, again, how many of those people practice with their broadhead out of their crossbow? I don't know the answer to that. Was it further distance than they've ever shot before? I don't know the answer to that too. What it comes down to, no matter where this data lies, did you practice? How much did you practice? And have you shot further distances than what you shot at that deer?
Yep.
Because I've had numerous times where I've gotten to a place and said, how far was the deer? Oh, it was 42 yards. I'll turn to him right away and ask him, have you ever practiced shooting your bow at 40 yards? Well, no, but my crossbow has that line in it, so I just figured it was okay.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, that was one I was especially too. I mean, that's so you did the fixed blade was 18%. Mechanicals again did much better in regards that you had a 60% recovery rate. Right. So they did perform a little bit better, at least in regards to that recovery rate.
Now, one I would like to talk about with this mechanical broadhead, I had a scenario last year. A guy shot a deer from a ground blind at 30 yards with a crossbow and a fixed blade broadhead. He calls me about an hour after he shot the deer. He gets out of his blind, he goes and kind of checks, and he takes some pictures. And he sends them to me, and he calls me, and he says, hey, I shot this deer. He says, I'm not really sure, but what do you think? And I looked at the blood, and I'm like, go track your deer. It's dead. Guarantee it. Dead deer. So he started tracking it, and he called me back about 45 minutes later. And I said, oh, okay. So I looked at it. Oh, Dave's calling me. Answered the phone. Hey, how's it going? He's like, you'll never believe this. And I'm like, what? He said, I jumped that deer up, and it took off running. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. He said, that deer's still alive. So I said, take some more pictures of the blood and send it to me. So he did. He sent me some more pictures, and I thought he was lying to me. I'm like, you're messing with me. There's no way that deer's still alive. Long story short, he ended up going back in there about 6 hours later. The deer was dead. However, he shot that deer, again, 30 yards with a fixed blade. When it impacted the deer, it busted the blades off, the mechanical. When it came out the other side, it looked like a number 2 pencil. When he opened that deer up, only the closest portion to him of the lung had been cut with the blade, but just barely. So it was literally just a little pinhole that deer was living on through its lungs, which is why it was still alive after an hour and a half, after he started tracking it. So that was interesting to me. And I think what that comes down to is the speed of the bows now. They're getting faster. And I don't remember, which I would probably never say anyways, but I think it was an off-brand mechanical broadhead as well. And so I think a little bit cheaper on the make has something to do with it too. So
and I mean, that's one argument of the mechanicals is that those blades, they give you a nice cutting diameter, but to make them work and not get too heavy of broadhead, they got to cut down on the amount of steel.
Absolutely.
They're flimsy, they can break easy, they bend. So that's unfortunate that, I mean, again, the other thing too is like you said, you got to test it. Even if you're a crossbow shooter, shoot that mechanical and make sure that it can handle it. Because like you said, there's the newest one now is 500, 550 for
something like
feet per second for.
And they're moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did the 50 tracks for archery. Of those 50 tracks, we recovered 28. So we were, we had a pretty good success rate on that. Again, we could go back through and kind of look at all those tracks and break them down even further. But on my end of it, not recovering that deer is mostly a guess. There's a few things that go into that to kind of prove one way or the other why I believe that. But so we had firearm tracks. We did 5. 3 of them, those were rifle. 2 were muzzleloader. And I just broke them down even here just to kind of show what rifle they were. 6.5 Creedmoor, 243, 350 Legend, and then 250 caliber muzzleloader. So we recovered 1 out of the 5. That was opening day rifle season. It was the 350 Legend. Actually, a lady I tracked for last year called me up and said, hey, I shot a deer. And her husband had actually videotaped it, sent it to me, and I was just like in shock that he was even calling me. He said, I can't believe we haven't found this deer. The other side to that too is if you remember back on opening day last year, it was snowing like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So from the time they called me till the time we got there was like 3 inches of fresh snow. So all the sign that was even potentially there was gone. And we ended up recovering that deer. It was like if I remember right, it was about 230 yards from the shot site. And it was a perfect double lung shot. Just didn't bleed. There was just nothing there. And so I'm not here to discuss calibers and all that, but there's obviously something to be said about different shot placements.
Yeah, same thing too. I mean, what brand of bullet did it expand? Did it break up?
Sure.
Yeah.
So so we had a couple, and then out of those 55 tracks that we did, obviously we found the 28, 29 if you include this one for the firearm. So 8 of those deer we got were confirmed alive. Now, that was either seen on the hoof, trail camera, shot by another hunter during the season. And those really are only the 8 that we got proof of. That's not to say that, because a lot of the times, actually, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I got a phone call from a guy that didn't call me during season and said, hey, I wanted to let you know that I did get another picture of that deer. So how many of those people that got a picture or seen it again just didn't remember or forgot to call me and said, hey, we seen that. So
Sure.
So yeah, kind of cool to get those, because that kind of gives you that closure a little bit.
Yeah.
To let you know whether you were right or wrong, and then from there, I just broke down, how many yards we did.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to just see kind of an average. So we did, in total of the 55 tracks, we had 40,242 yards, which equals out to be 22.86 miles. That's a lot of walking. And that's only during track. That doesn't include going back to the truck. That doesn't include walking to the shot site. That doesn't include, so that was just in general from the start of the shot point till the end of the track, whether we found the deer, we closed it out.
Yep.
What's interesting to me is the average track distance is 732 yards. And I thought that was kind of some cool data just to see, because that gives you an idea of if you make a crummy shot or a shot that you're really not too awful sure about, what's the chances you're going to stumble across a deer within 700 yards if you're just grid searching off of nothing?
Right.
So that was what I thought was kind of interesting data to kind of prove to people. Now, granted, we tracked deer that went 110 yards, and we tracked deer that went 2 miles.
Yeah, because definitely this data for the yardage, it would actually be more interesting to find out, how shot placement affects that.
Yeah, that would be something to break down too. And I have all that data. If you want to sit down with me, we can do that. But when you break down where the deer was shot, and I can only tell you 29 deer that I know where they were shot. That's
right.
Just because we found those deer.
Yep.
I can tell you 8 other deer that were confirmed alive where they were shot, or most likely because those people either seen them or got a picture, so I can say, yep, we were right. We thought it was a high shoulder shot, and I got a picture of a deer from a high shoulder shot that the guy we tracked for 3 weeks ago, so those deer I can put together. But yeah, I mean, just the overall knowledge of having this kind of gives you a broad range to kind of look at and say, man, if I double lung a deer, it's going to go this distance. But that's all out the window, because deer are resilient and they're going to go as far as they want to go until they expire.
Now, say, like you said, 732 yards for your average. Your longest was, and that was with recovery, was 2,600 yards.
Correct.
So, I mean, and do you remember how long that deer sat?
I'd have to go back and look and see which track that was to really give you an idea of which deer went that distance before it died. I don't remember offhand.
Yeah.
Which one that was.
Yeah, because again, that would be an interesting one of, again, knowing the shot placement, but again.
Yeah. I mean, I could look up that and find out for sure which deer that was that had been shot at that and went that far. I mean, was it a lung shot or I'm sorry, a liver shot or a gut shot? I don't remember offhand, but
Right.
that one. Now that I think about it, that very well could have been one of the deer that we had that ended up having to have another shot put on it.
Yeah. Which would make sense. I mean,
I think it was. Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, there would be no other reason why the deer would make it that far if it was mortally wounded.
Right.
And
Yeah, and that was, and that's part of with the year coming up now, having the ability to have the hunter have their weapon during the season. We actually had 2 instances last year where deer were shot in the front legs, and I say front legs, I mean right below the actual brisket of the deer and through both front legs,
okay,
which obviously they take off right away. They kind of know they're hit, but they've still got the use of those legs. But almost to a T, both shots were exactly the same, and they both went a lot further than I ever expected them to on virtually 2 legs.
Right.
Their front 2 legs were inoperable, but had we had been able to carry the weapon of the season, we probably could have shortened those tracks up just a little bit. But because we couldn't, we'd push that deer, we jumped it, it ran a ways, it bed back down, and we tried to get close enough for the hunter to say, okay, it's right there. And then obviously at that time I had to back the dog out. But it worked out in both cases. We were able to back the dog out, go back to the vehicle. The hunter was able to go back in there with their weapon, and then obviously take the deer down, and it worked out. But both of those deer were shot with bows. One was a crossbow, one was a compound, and both mechanical blade broadheads.
Yep. Well, I mean, and again, the other thing too is like it does show with these yardages that you have listed out, is that how long someone's going to be able to maintain doing a blood trail by themselves.
Right.
That's a lot of sign to be able to keep track of on your own.
For sure.
So again, if you're looking at 700 yards, I don't want to follow pinpoint blood for 700 yards.
Yeah, it could definitely get tiring for sure. Because, there's a lot of times too. I mean, and your track was a perfect instance of it. I mean, we went 200 and some yards, but it had rained and there was virtually no sign.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a little bit, but not enough that you would have been able to jump on it and just follow it from A to B. I mean, it would have taken you a lot of time to get to that deer.
Yep.
And so, and there's a lot of times too where we'll do that. I mean, now with that said, I'm following behind a dog, so I'm reading my dog more than I'm doing anything. But, a lot of times I'm looking down trying to say, hey, is my dog really doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or are we off and should we be somewhere else? And so I don't see that blood all the time, but most of the time, there just isn't any. There's just not much to go with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I had 2 instances. I mean, I called you the one day too. Same thing. I had blood at impact, and then make it 10 yards from there, and nothing. So, again, when it, like for that first one, like you said, it rained, it was misty. When I rewalked that trail where I thought the deer went, the only blood I found outside of where we had that initial blood right at the impact, she must have ran into a tree because there was a blood stain on a tree, but that was only 20 yards from where she laid.
Right. Close to where she was at.
Yep. So. And again, it was probably just because being on the side tree, and there was a good little patch where she clearly bashed right into it, where there was enough blood where it didn't get washed away. The second one, basically I knew the direction of travel, so I went around the other side where the thicket was and found blood about 50 yards from there, and then was able to follow from there. So, again, if I didn't, put 2 and 2 together, knowing where that deer had gone, if she had turned somewhere that I wasn't expecting,
out of there before you got to the other side or whatever.
Yep, it would have been a hard trail where, again, having the dog work would have been able to follow that deer, even if there was no visible sign.
Right.
So
yeah. So and then obviously, I took that information and then I broke it down even further, and the confirmed or known shot placements, I have obviously absolutely no indication otherwise than what we have. And so you can see I broke it down: lung to guts to lung, liver and guts to liver and guts. I broke all that down, and it's just interesting too to really see what each shot was and the ones we found versus obviously, again, we're unknown or only suspecting where we were guessing they were shot.
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice on the shot placement, confirmed or known, it says shoulder. Well, how do you know that? Well, I got a picture from the deer on a trail camera that's got a giant hole right in his shoulder blade. Pretty good chance that's where he shot it.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and again, the unknowns or suspecteds, those are just going off of what you told me. So just like when you called me last year, every single person that calls me, I break down right from the get-go, asking the 15 questions. And that helps me build this profile for you to decide. It's not a matter of if I'm going to come and track for you. I had an unfortunate circumstance last year. A guy had got a hold of me, wanted me to track for him, and I sent him my list. It doesn't matter if I send you the list or not. That's not me saying that if you don't fill this out or answer my questions, I won't track for you, but it helps me build the profile. And he refused to do any of that, and unfortunately it just didn't work out for both of us, and we kind of parted ways at that point. But it's not a matter of will I track for you or not. It's just helping me build the profile, because now when you tell me that you shot it back behind the last rib and the deer ran 100 yards, stopped, flickered its tail, and walked off slowly for the next 15 minutes till you lost sight of it, well, that now tells me that we need to wait at least 12 hours. So helping me understand what happened during your hunt scenario will help me decide on how we go about that track. It's not a matter of whether I'm going to track for you or not. And that's kind of how I break all that information out. And that just helps, again, for future reference, build this into some data for hopefully future reference.
Yep. And that's the other thing too, like especially too, thinking about it, is that so you did 55 tracks last year.
Yep.
Like how many hunters do that many tracks, like in a season or
right,
potentially even a lifetime?
Right. So I was actually thinking about that this morning on my way over here. Thinking about prior to me even deciding to do any deer tracking with a dog. How many deer do you shoot a season? Let's say 2.
Right.
Okay. How many seasons have you been hunting? We'll say, for easy math, 20. Okay. So you take and say, okay, I've been on 40 tracks, but did you shoot 2 deer every year? Probably not. So let's say 32, just for a number. So you went on 32 tracks in your entire lifetime. I did 55 in one season.
Yep.
So I followed behind a lot of different deer and seen the sign. And again, I'm not a professional. I'm never going to claim to be a professional. You're going to learn something every single season. You're going to learn something new. And unfortunately, we can try to pretend that we know what the deer are going to do, but every single deer is going to do something different. And it's all dependent on the scenario. And I really, truly believe, too, the location of the deer. A deer that's gut shot, in or close to a woodlot with a field is going to act different than a deer that's in a swamp. There's that play of, if you're close to a swamp, that deer can get into cover and out of sight pretty quick, but it might be standing in the edge of a cornfield and it has to run a quarter mile to get to woods. It's going to do that. Even though it's still gut shot, guess what? It still wants to get into cover.
Yep.
Out of sight. So, yeah, I mean, it's a learning every single day that you go out into the woods. It's something new.
Yep. And again, the big thing of that is like, yeah, you got to see 55 different scenarios. Mm-hmm. And so the next one, you can be like, oh, I've kind of seen this before. Yeah. Here's, kind of some predictors of what could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And that all comes with experience, and that's part of why I do the questioning. I do it the same every time. And the reason for that is because, number one, I know the answers that need to come, or I should say I know the questions that need to be asked, and I can get your answers. And if I do it the same way every time, I can build not only this data, but I can also build that experience later down the road. So when we get out into that scenario and I'm like, okay, he said he shot it here, and this is how the deer reacted, I should see some of this sign. It might not be every time, but I should be able to put some of that together. Now, with all that said, part of my job when I'm tracking is to watch my dog. That's really what I'm there for, because my dog's doing all the work. I'm just following along behind. Whether I'm looking at the sign or not, she's the one that's telling me. And so there will be times, and this really came full circle for me last season after probably about midway. I really started to figure Willow out. I really started to learn how she tracked, and there's cues that I'm starting to find with her, whether your deer's dead or not. And it may sound silly, and it may kind of be weird for people to say, "Yeah, right, you don't know that," but I can tell when Willow knows that the deer's dead, and I know that when we've been on a trail for 900 yards and she really starts picking up the pace, she's telling me that deer's still alive and she's trying to catch it.
Okay.
So, and how do I know that? Because of the deer that we had through the front legs. When we got close to those deer, she knew that that deer was still alive and she wanted to go. Like right now, I know that deer's still alive because they're putting off so much more scent. You know, when you're taking a deer that's wounded mortally in the beginning of the trail, they're kind of, I'm sure at some point it's up and down, but for the most part, it's kind of a constant scent pattern until they expire. But when you take a deer, it might be, let's say, hit through the front legs. There's a lot of that scent right off the bat, kind of peeks out. And then as that deer starts to think, like, man, maybe I'm not going to die, but I'm still hurting, that scent maybe dissipates just a little bit. But when we get close and we jump that deer again, all that adrenaline, all that scent dump gets happened again, and we get close to it, and that peaks again. And the dog knows that. She can smell all that. She knows when we're getting close to that deer. She can tell that that adrenaline dump happened again, and it gets her fired right up. And she might only be 25 pounds, but let me tell you, when she's ready to go, she's going.
Yeah. So I guess if for like a deer that she believes is dead, does she just kind of keep it even keel the whole way then
For the
too?
most part, yeah. I mean, it's all dependent, but for the most part, she's got that track. So from start to finish on a deer that's mortally wounded, and we'll just say for easy 500 yards, she'll pretty much start out in the same pattern that she does on every deer. A lot of people it's kind of comical to watch, but when we get to a spot, she'll start out, she'll kind of scent the area. Sometimes, and I think she did it with your deer, she followed backtrack about 10 yards before she jumped back on the track again. A lot of times what she'll do is she'll kind of go the direction that deer came from. She's kind of sniffing around to decide whether that's the deer she's after, and then she usually jumps back on the path.
Well, I don't think she did that, but the one thing that she did do that you kind of explained to me is that she was like 10, 15 yards like downwind of
Right.
where I thought the deer had gone out of the field.
Sure. Yeah, and so once she gets on that scent profile, she'll start down that path. Now, what she definitely did with your deer, she was off the side about 10 yards. And I think I actually looked it up on my phone once we found the deer, and I said, yep, we had a south wind last night. Because what happens is after 14 hours of that wind blowing from the south, it pushed all that scent over to the one side. So even though there was blood over here, all that scent got pushed over to the one side, and that's where she wanted to be. So, she was in the scent cone for her. We were like, okay, are you sure?
Yeah.
But she knew. And that's part of reading your dog and learning, yes, she's tracking, or no, she's not. And so that's probably been one of the biggest things over for me last year, and like I said, about halfway through the season, that I really, really started to become excited about, because I was really starting to figure her out. I had a hard time the first year. I didn't really know what I was doing.
Sure.
I mean, I had an understanding, but I didn't have the understanding of my dog.
Mm-hmm.
And after last season, I would show up to places and I would tell guys, about 3/4 of the way through the season, if your deer's dead, I'll know within the first couple hundred yards, because she's going to tell me. She'll know if the deer's dead or not. Plus, and again, that's not the only thing. I don't hone in on that and say, yep, that's the only reason. Plus, what you've told me, what we found for sign, and what we see during the track. So we can kind of put all that stuff together and really make a decision. And it's not a very easy feeling for me to go on a deer. You called me for a service. The service is you want me to find your deer. So for me to be like, yeah, I don't think we're going to find your deer, that's not easy for me to tell you.
Right.
So I want to put forth as much effort as possible. And I hope that anybody that I've tracked for in the past that has called, that I've gone out, if you ask them today, did you feel it was worth having them? I hope that they would say yes, because I want to make sure I don't come out and run my dog for a half hour and be like, nope, sorry, can't find it. A lot of the times on deer that I don't find, I've tracked for 3 or 4 hours. And that's not just tracking. It's okay, we're going to go over here now. Now we're going to go over here. And it might be after we've exhausted all efforts of trying to advance the track. Now we're searching areas, because once my dog gets near a deer, any deer that she can smell that would be dead, she knows. She's not stupid. So we try to exhaust all that effort too, to get that hunter. I'm not trying to make you believe that I know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to get you to believe what I'm showing and telling you is the truth, so that I don't feel, or you don't feel, that I'm ripping you off.
Right. Yeah, I thought about that too. Like you said, if you're going out by yourself and you have a hard track, like, okay, like there's a lot of variables you don't know.
Sure.
You bring in a dog, they stack your odds a bit.
Yeah.
But it's still not guaranteed.
No. Unfortunately, it's never a guarantee.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things. So I actually had a lady I tracked for last year. She called me up, and she was quite a ways away. It was like an hour and 45 minutes from my house. And so I told her I'd be willing to come up there. She gave me the scenario, and I said, from what you've told me, it doesn't sound great, but I'll still come if you'd like me to. And I learned some from that, but she learned exponentially more than she ever would have just by doing it herself. And it was a unique situation. They tracked the deer a long ways prior to me even getting there. And they followed pretty much a walking blood trail. So right there off the get-go, it went like, I want to say it was like 0.75 miles prior to me even being called. So that's already a long ways on a walking blood trail.
Yeah.
So I'm already kind of like, it's probably not looking good, but I'll come if you still want me to. And what I was able to do for her, and again, I'm still only guessing, but I was able to find the bed that the deer, she couldn't find that bed. The dog found the bed, and I was able to kind of point out to her, you could clearly see in the leaves where the deer had bedded down. You could see the front legs. You could see everything. And all the blood that was in there was right at the very, very front between both front legs. Most likely a brisket shot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I put together not only the bed, the walking blood trail, the amount of blood, and the reaction of the deer. You probably most likely shot the deer through the brisket. Most likely a grazing shot. She found the arrow. I mean, everything was right there. And so put her mind at ease a little bit more that the deer's probably never going to die from that. But here's where I believe you hit it. And so it took that little bit of education to just show her, here's what you're looking at. Here's why I believe that. And she was able to actually, I think it was a month or so after that, she went on Facebook and left a review and just said, I helped her out so much that educating her, and that's kind of what I want to do too, is educate people. Again, I'm not a professional, but from what little knowledge I have now, build that to people and say, hey, next time you shoot a deer and you believe this is what happened, you might be able to take just a little bit of what I told you and put that into that aspect and kind of make your own assumption.
Yeah, because those brisket ones are tough too, because don't they bleed quite a bit?
A lot.
So it kind of gives you a little bit of a...
It's false hope in a lot of people's mind.
Mm.
And that's what I have to try to put together to some people. I did 2 tracks in one day last year, both of them virtually walking blood trails. Virtually. For over 2 miles apiece.
Oh, jeez.
So in your mind as a hunter, you want to believe, like, man, my deer's still bleeding and it's been 2 miles. He's got to bleed out sometime. But in reality, what deer that's mortally wounded goes 2 miles? Not very many, if any.
Right.
That's a walking blood trail. So those are the tough ones, and both of those deer were confirmed alive later on.
Yeah.
So that was cool that, I put forth the effort to, because I could have stopped after a mile and a half and said, your deer's not dead. because I knew the sign, but
Mm-hmm.
I kept pushing forward and I kept moving, and we finally, I think the one we came to a point where there just wasn't any blood anymore at all, and the other one we came to a point where we got into a property line issue, and I said, if you guys want to get permission, we can. And the guy was an older gentleman, and after 2 miles, he's like, "I'm done. I think you're right." And both of those deer were shot exactly where I thought they were, which was high back straps.
Yeah. Now on those tracks where the sign that isn't looking good, or like you said, if you're reading Willow and it seems like that deer's live, like are you pushed a little bit to try to see if you can at least catch up to that deer, or is
Um,
it, or is that really not really that
yeah.
big of a concern for you?
So it all depends on the scenario. What you say, where you thought you shot it, the sign that I have. I'll keep pushing on a deer as long as I keep finding sign. I'll keep pushing on a deer until either A, the hunter says, "Yeah, I don't think we're going to find this deer," or I've decided that, or we get to a point where property line issues, which we have sometimes. But I'll keep going on a track until we don't have any more sign or we find the deer. Now, we had one instance where we continued, and we jumped the deer, and you could have been like, "Yeah, I don't think that deer was shot at all." You could tell it got up and busted out of there like nothing happened.
Like nothing was wrong.
And so, and especially those ones that are 15 to 20 hours old, and you jump a deer and it doesn't even look like it's been injured, and you're tracking on a walking blood trail, and it's most likely been shot through the back straps. Kind of hard to keep pushing on a deer that's still alive, knowing that you probably won't get a follow-up shot no matter what.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, you've collected a lot of data that especially most people aren't going to be able to compile. Like I said, even in a potential lifetime
sure.
of different tracks, the type of take that was part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we'll wrap this one up now because we've gone through the data. I do want to talk two things.
Yep.
One, with the new dog with Scout.
Yeah.
Again, he's been showing a lot of potential, and we talked about a little bit that because Willow, is not, her breed is not known for
Yeah.
tracking. That as a terrier, they do have that kind of heritage as still a working dog.
Sure.
But now Scout, he's the, I never get the name right.
Louisiana Catahoula leopard.
Catahoula.
Yeah.
Leopard dog, and those dogs are known for
They were
tracking.
originally, for hog hunting down in Louisiana. They're the Louisiana state dog. There's a lot of people that have them for tracking purposes, and kind of a last minute deal. My wife had found a breeder that had one, and I wasn't quite sure whether I wanted another one right off the bat or not, but we just dove into it and said, sure, why not? And so it's been interesting, to say the least, to do training with him. He's gonna be a pretty good dog, I think, for tracking, and it's not only because the Louisiana Catahoula is a bloodhound, a mastiff, and the native red wolf. He's got that natural instinct for tracking. He's got the natural instinct for the ability to follow a track, and the cool part about it for me now, understanding how Willow works, he is so much easier to read. I can follow behind him and know exactly what he's doing, versus before when I was following Willow, I didn't know if we were going left or going right. I had no idea. So following behind him is much easier to read and follow. He's got the long tail. He's got the big floppy ears. He's pretty cool to watch on a track. Fortunately, I've been out, doing some training with him this season, but I was able to get him on a couple crop damage permits a couple weeks ago on some live deer, and he did really well. Pretty excited about that. So it'll be an interesting season to see how things pan out. Everybody's been asking, how are you going to do that? And I'm not sure yet how I'm going to play out having two dogs trying to run tracks. But if people still have known kills that run 60 plus yards that they want to call me, I'd love to bring Scout out on them. I'll probably still try to run them on a few tracks that I know are pretty good chances of being dead. If it's close enough to home, I'll probably take him first. If it doesn't work out, I always have Willow for the backup. So yeah, I'm excited about having him as part of the team this year. It'll be interesting to see.
I'd be more worried about Willow. No, because you already told me that you took him on a track, and Willow knew that where he had been, and she's real particular.
She is, yeah. So I know last year we talked when we did this. I discussed, Willow at the end gets pretty aggressive, and I don't want to say aggressive, but she's just possessive over the deer, and it was more like, hey, found the deer, maybe lick the nose, maybe lick a little blood, and that was kind of the end of it. But about halfway through the season, now our new fun game is pulling the fur out, which a lot of tracking dogs do.
Yeah.
And so, good and bad. I mean, it's good because that's her treat now. That's her reward. She wants to do that. Bad part is, are you going to mount that deer? Because if you are, I'll stop her.
Yeah. Are you doing a cape?
So most of the time she'll go after the rear end of it, somewhere in that backside. But I always have to ask people.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the biggest thing for me is finding out what gets Scout going. Because Willow has found now that that's what she wants. I mean, I do practice runs with her all the time, and we get to the end, and she's like, "Wait a minute. What happened to the deer? There's usually a big deer laying here, and I get to play with it, and this is kind of boring."
Yeah.
And with him training, running practice tracks, he gets to the end, and he's not really been that interested in the deer leg. I've tried treats, I've tried human food, I've tried some other stuff, and he's just kind of like, yeah, whatever. I think he enjoys just being out in the woods walking, and I think that's more of what gets him going. But then when we found those live deer, he was a little standoffish at first, not really sure about them, kind of like, yeah, okay. And then after the second one, it was kind of a little bit better. And then he got to play Willow's game, which is following the deer out of the woods, being dragged, and he thought that was pretty cool. So I think that we'll definitely find out here shortly how he does with all that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be, like I said, I mean, it'll be interesting trying to run two dogs and try to balance that out. But, having that, I mean, I don't see why that would be necessarily a bad thing, having two potential dogs, especially like you said, if you get a long track and Willow starts getting tired, or if like this seems like she's having a hard time, or maybe if you take one on Scout on one, he has a hard time.
Sure.
You got that backup, you can bring in a fresh dog.
Yeah, I think where it'll really benefit me is probably in another year or two when they're both fairly seasoned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what that'll do for me is, obviously there's going to be days that I'm just going to be tired too, but, Willow takes a track and it tires her out. She's just not ready to go for the afternoon. I'll have another dog as a backup.
Yep.
Or, we do 3 tracks with Willow one day, give her the next day off, and then Scout jumps in and does some too. So it'll be a back and forth. There's also going to be determination on what the terrain's like. Willow is pretty... I guess I'll say she's pretty determined about going. It doesn't matter where it's at, I'm going to go. But there'll be times, too, where it's just going to be more feasible for me to take a long-legged dog like Scout versus trying to take short-legged Willow. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, so I'm excited, man. I mean, again, it's going to be pretty much like if I'm fortunate enough to sling some lead or some arrows at deer, I'll be calling you like, hey man, like this is what we got. What do you think? Bring a dog.
Yeah. So, and I talk about it every time I talk to somebody that's always interested in tracking or anybody who's a hunter. My phone number's out there. If you need to call me, call me. Even if it's for advice, give me some information. I can tell you what maybe to do next or what the best option for you would be to do. The bonus this year is, again, you call me and I'm busy, I got another guy on backup.
Yep.
Vice versa for him. So excited about that. With that said, Brian and I both this year will be tracking by donation only again. So we found that there's people out there that just can't afford to pay for a deer tracking service. And just a quick little story. I had a lady call me last year. She had actually posted on one of the groups on Facebook that she was looking for a deer tracking dog, and a couple people had put my name on there. She was about an hour and a half away from me, but they had put my information on there. And shortly after she made that post, she put another post out there and talking about, wondering how much it would cost for a tracking dog. And you'll get a broad range. You know, you'll get somebody that's paid for a dog before and it was $300, and you'll get somebody that put on there. There's some guys track by donation, and then you get everybody else that says, oh, they charge 150 to 300. Just depends on how far they have to travel. Well, it really deterred her completely from wanting to even call a tracking dog in because she didn't have any money. And so she ended up calling me, and I just explained to her, like, look, I do it by donation only. If you don't have any money to pay me, that's fine. I don't care. This is why I do what I do, and it's the reason is because I want everybody to have the option and the ability to have the same opportunity to find their deer as the next guy. And so she was really off-put by wanting me to come, and I think it was more or less she just felt guilty about having somebody come that wasn't going to charge her. And we went out there and we tracked that deer down. It was like 565 yards. Found her deer, and that lady was so excited about that. She thought that was the best thing ever. Willow made a new friend that day. She was so excited, and the lady just was in shock that I would even come and do that for free. But I found that doing those type of scenarios, not only are you helping that hunter, but now she just passed my name on to how many other people that I can assist and help out.
Right. Yep.
So Brian and I are both in the same boat, both tracking for donations only. We're going to try to stick within reason close to our counties, but if you have a track further away, then so be it. We'll definitely try to get to you. It's going to be a busy season. It's going to be a lot of phone calls, but we're excited about it. Looking forward to it.
Well, speaking of which, let's recap again. If they wanted to reach out, where do they find your information
Sure.
at? So
the number one way, if you're interested at all, check out our Facebook page, Scent Hunter Tracking. And the cool part about that is you can go on there, you can look back on throughout the season of last year, also with all of our training and stuff that we've done for the last few months. The other ways you could do it is either Michigan Deer Tracking Network. You go on their Facebook page, they're going to have the list of all the trackers. And that's not just for me, obviously. That's all the state of Michigan. So if you have a place, you live in Benzie County, but you deer hunt in the UP, go on there and find somebody that has a tracking dog in that area. You can hopefully get a tracking service. The other one's Michigan Deer Trackers. They have a virtual map, shows a map of Michigan, gives you all the locations of the different trackers on there. And then the last one would be the United Blood Trackers, the UBT, and they have a list of trackers on there as well. So anybody that's looking to find a tracker, any of those three would be your best bet. And especially with the new changes this year, even though you have to be registered, you want your service to be somebody that has a dog that maybe not seasoned in the most veteran dogs, but at least somebody that's out there doing it for the right reasons. You're not taking a dog that, my dog's wandered behind me before while I tracked a deer. You want somebody that's going to, have a dog that's going to come out that's actually knows what they're doing and has the purpose of tracking deer versus just, let's just see if they can find a deer or not.
Right. But, all right, man. Well, again, thank you for collecting all this data.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, like you said, from after this season.
Sure.
Do those numbers match up, or like you said, does everything flip flop and you get completely different data points?
And I still haven't convinced Brian yet. Brian's not much of a data guy, which is why he's joining, because he doesn't have Facebook. But I wrote all this stuff down, and I was kind of telling him about it, and he's like, "You're not going to make me do that, are you?" So I do have a form for him that I'm hoping he'll fill out, and it's going to be pretty basic. This is the basic information that I'd like to have, though. So
right.
It's pretty simple. I'm hoping I can get him to do it, because that's just that much more data that we can add to that and just try to build off of. Doesn't mean anything for me, doesn't mean anything for you. Not necessarily, but it's information that we can at least look at and provide to people and just say, hey, this is kind of what we're looking at. Make your own assumptions or decisions off of that, but I think it's a lot of fun just kind of sitting down and looking at it and having people be able to look back and say, oh, well, that is pretty interesting to see. So
yeah, because there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there.
Yeah.
Not too many people actually take the time and document and collect a bunch of data.
Yeah, and I didn't do it for the purposes of you shoot a fixed and I shoot a mechanical. Mine's better than yours. That's not why I did it. But it proves, in a way, if you use this information the correct way, you can kind of provide some better argument points versus just saying mine's better than yours.
Yeah, same thing. Like we discussed at the very beginning
Yep.
of changing up my arrow setup
For sure.
because I want to be able to collect data.
Sure.
Looking at like, hey, the odds are, I love fixed plays. I'm a fixed play guy. I love shooting them.
Sure.
There are some drawbacks that you have to take in consideration.
And one thing that, probably the biggest number one thing that I could say as a deer tracker is I put forth a lot of effort in the off season to make sure that my dog is ready for the hunter. And one thing that we always try to say is I'd like you to do the same.
Yep.
And I don't necessarily think that every decision or every person that calls us is because they made a bad shot because they wanted to. But a lot of the tracks that we go on are just poor shot placement. And, that's probably the number one thing is you didn't purposely shoot that deer in the shoulder. You just made a bad decision because he was facing you and you thought you could sneak it in behind the front shoulder. And you didn't. And so, practice, practice, practice. Make sure you're shooting your bows. And honestly, I would like to see more hunters take the time to learn the anatomy of a deer. We so many times as a bow hunter, we take time, practice shooting at your deer target, and you pick out a spot. We're always picking out a spot.
The dot.
Okay, I'm going to put a dot on my target, and I'm going to shoot that all day long. Where's the dot on a deer? You ever seen a dot on a deer? Besides a fawn?
Right?
You ever picked out a spot on a deer that you're going to shoot?
Yeah.
But if you had the anatomy in your head, if you knew exactly where those vitals were at, you'd probably think about your shot placement a lot more.
Well, I mean, if you follow any Facebook page or any Facebook page about hunting, there's always you see one page or two or posts where it's like, what A, B, or C, where you shooting, and there's always debate on that. So yes,
Yeah, and there's going to be debate on it all that, and there's sides of it that you can. Every scenario is different.
yep,
The deer's facing broadside. It's got its head up and it's looking the other direction. You're going to pick A, B, or C. Well, sure, that's an easy decision to make. Now the deer's facing you on high alert. You're going to pick A, B, or C. Well, that's an easy decision to make. But in the time and in the moment when you're in the tree stand and that deer's standing there, do you know? Because a lot of the times, too, people always say, well, the deer was broadside. Okay? How broadside was he? Because what's broadside? Because broadside could be completely broadside, or was it broadside, but he was really only just slightly quartering to you? That makes a huge difference in your arrow impact.
yep,
Huge difference.
yeah. I know. I thought about that. I think we talked about a little bit of that track that you and Willow did for me. I was so conscious of like wait for the doe to put her front leg forward,
Sure.
get that front leg forward.
Yeah.
Well, she had her head down eating. And I didn't think about it because I've seen plenty of videos of like deer. They're able to load up and duck so much quicker because they throw their head up,
Yep.
dip their shoulders down, and I hit high. I'm like, I didn't even consider that when I was making the shot. Like I know better, but again,
But it all happened so fast.
yep,
And it's just one of those things to think about. And, the big thing to take away from all that is, again, if you understand the anatomy and where the bone structure really is, everybody wants to hug the front shoulder because where's the heart? Well, that's the money shot, right? Everybody you see on Facebook, heart shot, shot. I got a heart shot, and everybody thinks they're like Captain Cool because they got a heart shot. But your margin of error is so much more. If
Yep.
you just moved back 3 inches and up 2, your margin of error is bigger, but you have a better success.
yeah,
Just because a deer ran 30 yards and died with a heart shot, okay, it ran 60 and died with a double lung shot. So be it. The deer still dies. But now when you're aiming for the heart and you hit the front shoulder and you're calling me, where were you aiming? I was aiming for the heart. Cool. Well, here I am.
yeah,
I'm ready to track.
yeah. At that point, then the next question is like, well, how much arrow penetration did you get?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and again, I'm not being pompous about it. It's just education is a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I try to do a lot of when I go out and talk to people and track for them. It's just education too. I mean, that's a big one. And again, back to when we talked a little earlier about crossbows. They have 20, 30, 40 in their rings, but how many times have you practiced that?
Yeah,
Or the big thing I see a lot of too is, it was like, the deer was standing at like 30, I think it was like 31 yards. Okay, cool. So I'll get there and I'll be like, well, where were you sitting? Well, I was up in that tree right there. I don't have a rangefinder with me, but I've hunted long enough. You got a rangefinder on you? Yeah. Did you use it? Well, no. Then you range it and it's like 47. It's like, okay. Yeah, so if you have a rangefinder, use it. I mean, that's just the point of that too is, your distance. It all happened so fast I didn't get my rangefinder out and I guessed the distance. Well, now I can tell you why you backstrap shot that deer is because you thought it was closer than it was, or it was, whatever. So
that's a bit of a sore subject, man. The backstrap thing.
Yeah.
Well, that, and I kind of did that this year. I missed my buck because I thought I knew what the range was. He was just 5 yards closer than what I thought he was at. Shot right over his back. Arrow landed exactly where my pin was pointed at, though.
Put it right where you wanted it.
Right where I wanted it. But yeah, no, I think we kind of touched on that at the beginning. Be confident and competent with your equipment.
Absolutely.
Know how it shoots. Like you said, put your broadhead on.
Yep.
Shoot that. Make sure it flies. Like you said, mechanicals typically fly true to the
most of the time
for the field point, but you don't know until you try it.
And again, I mean, not all the calls that we have are bad, poor choices.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's people that call just because things happen.
Nope.
And that's fine. And that's totally understandable. And that's why we're here. So we're excited about it. I'm looking forward to this season. Should be a good season. Should be a busy season.
It will be.
But we're excited to kick off for the youth season coming up here in another, week and a half? 2 weeks? I guess it's 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
7th.
Yep.
So looking forward to that. Got the youth season, the early antler list, and then after that we'll kick off bow season. So we'll be tracking for the youth season. We'll be tracking for free. So
okay.
I mean, we do donation.
Still donation,
but we're gonna just do it for free. Nobody's got to pay us for the youth hunt that weekend. So we'll be excited to get out in the woods, and I know the dogs are excited.
Yeah.
Willow's itching.
Yeah, she's probably getting tired of this training.
Yeah, we've been watching a little deer hunting at home. The weather's starting to change, so we've been watching a little of that. And boy, she is all excited about that.
Do we got a quick second to talk about
Absolutely.
that? How she gets all excited just watching deer hunting?
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous, actually.
So, if you haven't seen it, go to the Scent Hunter tracking. What did you put on your page?
It should be on there.
Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was some that this Caitlin had
If
posted.
not, I'll just have my wife do another video tonight when we're watching it because it's really something.
So this dog is watching TV, watching the deer, and the moment the arrow hits the deer, she goes ballistic.
Yes, she does.
Starts getting super aggressive.
Absolutely.
And is ready to go on track.
She knows what's happening next.
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty funny because I knew she'd put two and two together with the deer. We were watching deer hunting one night, and she was laying on the ottoman, and she kind of like looked up as the deer was walking past the screen, and you could just tell she was just like laser focused on, okay, now I know what I'm watching. I know what I'm looking at. And eventually there was a couple more deer that walked past, and then she was on the floor watching. And then another deer walked past, and she was closer to the TV. And before you know it, eventually the hunter shoots the deer, and she grabbed her ball, and she's shaking it and growling, and she knows what's happening. And now it's kind of ridiculous because we try to watch TV, and that's all you can hear is her growling at the TV. She just wants to go deer tracking. So, But I've also noticed two scouts sitting on the couch, and then he'll start. You can see his eyes kind of pep up, and he's watching the TV too. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
All right.
Cool.
But that, I mean, again, we could just keep telling stories, but
Yeah.
that was a funny one. That she's ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yep, looking forward to it. So good luck this season.
yeah, yep. And again, if it's in question or whatnot, and you just want a consultation, reach out to a tracker. Again, they've got
Absolutely.
a ton of experience, and they can give you some pointers as to what to do next. So, but with that, I think we're gonna wrap this up.
Good.
You've got things to do this afternoon, so. And then
Appreciate you having me on again, and good luck to everybody this season. Looking forward to it, and
all right, that's it.
all right, take care.
All right, so that's it for this episode with Calvin. Again, a lot of really good information that he presented and a lot of important points that he brought up. One that we kind of talked about a little bit, but didn't really get into too much was, the idea of calling a tracker doesn't mean that you messed up. Kind of hit on this point a little bit about making sure that you're, proficient with your equipment. You know how it shoots. Kind of like what we talked about with the bow shooters, especially. Making sure that that when you switch over to your broadheads from your field points, that they're hitting in the same spot that you've been practicing with all year. And then also for the crossbowers as well, same thing. Double check, make sure that those broadheads are fine with your crossbow the way it should be, and that the capabilities of the equipment that you're using. That's one of the things that, as hunters, we all know that things happen and mistakes are made, but don't let your equipment, not knowing what your equipment does or the capabilities of your equipment be the reason why that happens. There's a lot of human error involved, especially when it comes to bow hunting, and we don't need, mechanical failures that could be prevented or performance issues that could be prevented to be the reason why you don't harvest that deer. Make that clear that, we certainly understand that, sometimes you make a poor shot, things happen, we're human, but don't let that equipment, not knowing how your equipment operates be the reason why. So I did want to clarify that a little bit. And again, if you do have a track that you need, made, if you look at that sign, it looks questionable, or it looks like it's going to be a hard track for you. If you didn't see that deer go down, if you are questioning how far that deer is going to make it, or if you know that it's going to be a long track, one of the easiest things to do is, start going on the track and then realize that you need help later. If you are suspecting that you might need help, give a dog tracker a call. They're going to ask you a lot of the information that Calvin's going to ask you, shot placement, distance, what were you using, just get a basic idea of kind of what the situation is. And then they can even just give you some insight of what to do next, or they may come out, give you a hand with that track, and just be that little bit of a backup if you need it. So again, if you're interested or you're considering reaching out to a tracker, I'm going to have the information for some areas to reach out to a dog tracker in your area. Again, this is mostly for the state. So if you're outside of Michigan, I don't have that type of data. But if you're here in Michigan, those resources will be linked down below for you to be able to reach out to them. It's good to have that, kind of in your back pocket if you need them, than to have to try to find them later. Again, a lot of good information and some really good resources if you need them. So again, don't hesitate to call. And it's one thing that, if you ever do have to call a dog tracker, it's amazing watching those dogs work. It's kind of one of those things where I experienced that last year, and it's one of those things where you realize just how much of an asset those dogs can be when they're on point. So that's it. Again, we are at the doorstep of deer season. So with that, that's a wrap. And as always, get out there, be safe, and have fun.